what's next for JavaScript? I'm Bram. Good afternoon. This is today. Yeah, that's right. This is today in the Dutch format. Frontend United. Just look at it, people. It's amazing, right? I know it's yellow. It's very yellow, but it's not just any yellow. This, people, is JavaScript yellow. This is like a yellow it's only there for JavaScript. Like if you see this yellow, you know it's JavaScript. This is the hex code for it, if you want to know. It's on Twitter, if you also want to know. So that's like really official right now. If it's on Twitter, it's official. Although there's no verified check mark there, so kind of official, right? And you can use it on your website if you want. Like if you have a website and you want to have your JavaScript yellow onto that, you can do that. So I started Googling, like, hey, JavaScript, how to set the background color of your website. Turns out you have to do quite a lot of stuff, like really a lot of stuff to get that working if you're doing JavaScript. So like first, how? Well, first you have to do this, you have to install Homebrew, because Homebrew, that's like the tool you use to install software onto your Mac. And then once you have that thing installed, you install NVM, that's like the node version manager, because you don't want to run one node version, you want to run all the node versions, right? So when you have that done, then you install node version 10, because that's the latest version, then you alias it to the default, and then you can start working, although you don't install dependencies using npm anymore, you do that using yarn. So you say, hey, Homebrew, I also need yarn, but without node, because you already have that, thanks to NVM. Then using yarn, you can install the JavaScript yellow package. Bear with me, we're getting there. Then you do something with Webpack, like, Google a lot. Then you get that working. You import the yellow from the JavaScript yellow package. You do some more JavaScript thingies. You open up your website, and it's broken. If only there was a way like to set colors on websites. Perhaps this guy has an idea. Who knows this person? Who is it? Eric Meyer? Eric. Yeah, you can call him Eric, apparently. He's a CSS expert. He even wrote some stuff for CSS, I don't know. Yes, he did. So, awesome fella. I think he has an idea how you can set a background color onto a website. Like, just this, perhaps. Yeah, and then you have a beautiful website with JavaScript yellow onto it. Now, I'm not here to bash like JavaScript or CSS or whatever, but I do want to tell you this, like we have this magnificent toolbox on the web that we can use to build websites. We have HTML, CSS, JavaScript, we have a lot of extensions, we have preprocessors, we have all kinds of stuff, but just please use the right tool for the right job. Last week I created a regular website without React. Okay. And then a few weeks before that I created a React app, so that's fine, but just know which tool you're going to use. Okay, so but we were here for JavaScript, right? What's next for JavaScript? Well, before I can tell you that, I do need to talk a little bit about like what's now for JavaScript, because we have some JavaScript experts in here who write React every day, and then we have some people who know a few things about JavaScript. So we need to like set a bit of a baseline right here. But first, some history. ECMAScript timeline. This is 1995. That's 2018. So there's about 20-ish years in between that, I think. Yeah. So what happened in 1995? Who was born then? I was born back then. So I have gray hair to prove that. In 1995, this came up onto the Netscape website. Netscape and Sun announced JavaScript, the open cross-platform object scripting language for internet. Whoa, amazing. They did this announcement and they launched JavaScript. Very great. Brandon Eich, the inventor of JavaScript, he wrote that thing. In 1996, JScript came out, so that was like Microsoft. They said, this JavaScript thing, kind of interesting. We're just going to copy that, like reverse engineer it and re-implement that kind of thing, but we're not going to call it JavaScript, we're going to call it JScript. Kind of the same. But then this thing happened, like the ECMA International Committee, they were burdened with the task like, hey guys, standardize the language. This is like a really cool kind of stuff that mostly happens in the web. Like first something is invented, and then somebody else copies it, and then later on it's standardized, and then the original implementations, they focus on the standards, like they re-implement the standard. Great kind of stuff. So these guys, ECMAScript, ECMA International, they started writing. 1997, poof, this thing here, ECMA 262, that's the identifier of the standard. ECMAScript, a general purpose cross-platform programming language. Programming language. If somebody says, you ain't JavaScript and the real language, it says right there. So that was 1997. And then ES1 came out, so we have the ES1 standard, the ECMAScript 1 standard. ES2 came out, ES3 came out, like try catches, we can only do that since 1999. It's the year of the matrix, right? Something-ish. So before the matrix, no try catch, after the matrix, try catch. 2000, 2001, something's going on, what happened? This happened, they had a fight. Like people were trying to advance the standard, add some extra new features onto that and stuff like that, but then some discussions started happening. Like you had the Macromedia folks, the guys from Flash originally, ActionScript 3 kind of things. Like they were also involved into the standard. They proposed some stuff, but then other people thought, nah, it's not a good thing, let's not do that, so they had a fight, and ES4 never existed. So they did like the Windows numbering thing, they jumped over one, or the PHP numbering thing, we jumped over one, we got ES5. Why is that? Well, here around this time, Ajax started happening, and people got like re-interested in JavaScript, and then perhaps we should like extend the standard again with a few things. Let's scrap most of the IDs here, like classes. Classes were in there originally. Let's scrap a few things and then just try to move forward. You can find everything that's in there on this link. The slides will be online, by the way. No need to like copy over links or take a picture. You can take a picture, of course. But there's some really great stuff in there that we use, like JSON support. Officially since 2009, even though it was in browsers before that time. But right here it was standardized. Then in 2011, 5.1, that's like just a minor rewrite to comply with some other standard, like you have to use a capital letter at the beginning of a sentence, that kind of stuff. Well, they were compliant with that standard. And then some really great stuff. 2015, you might have heard about this thing called ES6. ECMAScript 6. Well, one note about this, we no longer say ES6 because the ECMA script, the ECMA, the folks from ECMAScript, the folks from ECMA International, sorry, the folks from ECMA International, they said like, okay, hey guys, we're going to do just yearly releases. So they renamed this one from ES6 to ES 2015, and then they say like every year, we're going to release a new version of our standard. 2016, ES 2016, 2017, ES 2017, 2018, surprise, ES 2018. So now in January, guess what? ES 2019, it's coming, yeah. And now the rest of the talk will focus here on this part. I will talk a little bit about this, a little bit about that, and then also about the future. Cool, so ES 2015, a quick refresher, trying to set a baseline here. So like all this kind of stuff got into the standard. It's a lot of stuff because it was a huge addition to it. We're not going to talk about everything here, we're just going to talk about these. Because these are the kind of things that I today use on a daily basis. If you're writing React and that kind of stuff, you are using this thing. Who here does like these kind of things? Promises, most likely, yeah, arrow functions, destructuring, some few. All right, awesome, cool. So arrow functions, it's really easy. At first I was like, oh, what the fuck? But sorry. At first I was like, what? But then it was really easy. You just drop the function keyword and replace it with like the arrow over there. That's an arrow function. It can return stuff, of course, but if you just drop these kind of things here, the curly braces, then this value gets returned, so it's implicitly returned. And also another thing that's great about them, that is if you only have one argument onto your function, you can drop the parents right here. So this function this reads as function reverse equals function reverse one argument str, and then it returns this kind of stuff. And then here we see some string interpolation. That's also a very nice feature from ES 2015. Why would you want to use arrow functions? Because of this kind of thing. Like imagine that you have an accordion with a title, with a tiny arrow, and then you click on it and it goes open. Then you click on the arrow again and it collapses, and then like the element gets removed or something, or another class gets applied onto the element. Well, if you do this thing right here, that won't work, because the this in this function, it refers to the window right there. So you have to do all sorts of trickery, like create an intermediate variable, and then through the closure, like the function would creep out of it and find it eventually. Well, it's also solved if you just use an arrow function, because then the this inside that arrow function, the moment you create the function, it will bind the current this, so that's the thing that was clicked on, onto that function. So this is like a really great use case. Why would you want to use arrow functions? Should you always use arrow functions? Well, no. If you're not using this inside of your functions, then you don't need to use an arrow function. So I try to combine both. Really great stuff. Enhanced object literals. This is the old way, like the key, and then you had the name of the variable. If they are the same thing, like you have the same identifier, the key here and the name of the variable, you can use like this shorter version. It really compresses your code. I'm a lazy coder, I don't like typing. So the less I have to type, the better. Team trailing commas, by the way. We'll discuss on that later if you want. Promises, also something from ES 2015. You might recognize this, like you have this big indentation tree where you have a callback that is executed after the outer thing is like done, and then another callback and another callback, and then you're like 7 tabs onto that way of your screen. Team tabs, by the way, not spaces. Another discussion for later today. Well, you can solve that. Like, I like this code more. It's like just one line underneath each other, and this kind of thing is a promise. So like here you return a promise, and then it says like execute it, and whenever that thing is done, then we continue with the rest of it. And the cool thing is you can change these things. Like this thing right here, it's also a promise. So when this one is resolved or rejected, well, when it is resolved, then the next then will kick into action. Another promise, when this one is resolved, this one will kick into action, and so forth, and so forth, and so forth. Whenever it is rejected, one of those, then the catch will kick into action. So if this one is rejected, it will be caught by the same catch at the bottom, just as if this one would be rejected. A real-world example, the fetch API. We no longer use XML, HTTP requests, object thingy, whatever-ish. Fetch is baked into browsers. You have polyfills for that also. And this thing returns a promise. And then the cool thing here, you can then get a response, parse it to JSON, but this is also a promise. So we can chain like our code one after the other. I really like this kind of stuff. First you have a response, we parse it, then we have some JSON, and so forth. Really great. You can roll your own if you want. There's a promise class baked inside JavaScript. It's available in your browser, so you can roll your own promises if you want to promisify, or how you call it, your code. Then destructuring. This is something that Sarah just talked about in the talk about Preact. Who saw that talk? That you can like destructure in right directly into the render function because they are passed in as arguments. Well, in normal React then, or just in JavaScript, you do this. So you have this object here, user, first name, last name, and so forth. You pluck the first name from it, and you pluck the city from it, from that user object. So at this time, right here, you have a first name variable available and a city variable available, and you can just use them. This is really, really great stuff. I like this. default value if you want. If there's no value, then you can provide a fallback value, and also aliasing if you don't want it to, like the Twitter thing right here, if you wanted to have it available as Twitter handle, you can alias it directly in your destructuring piece of code. A use case, well, we said some arrays, some objects before. You can also do it with arrays. Like instead of getting input at index 0 at the very first index, you just do it like this. It's variable A, and then right here it's variable B. Oh, the first 2 people are leaving already. No worries. Thanks for coming. A typical use case, a use case you can use this thing for, but I've never used it before. If you want to swap 2 variables, you can do that. Okay, great. Thank you, JavaScript. Woo! And then array, rest, and spread, like we destructure A and B from numbers. That's like A will be -1, B will be 5, but what about like 11 and 3? How can we like capture the rest of this kind of thing? Well, you can use this kind of structure right here. Using this, this piece of thing right here, so like the 3 dots and then rest, it's like this magical magnet. And everything that you don't destructure from numbers will be collected onto that magnet. So if we log rest, we indeed get an array with 11 and 3 as the values onto that thing. What about objects? Well, that's ES 2017 or ES 2018 officially, so I'll talk about that later. Spreading is like the other way around. A use case is this. If you want to concatenate 2 arrays, then if you want to do that like immutably, then you start with an empty array, and then you concatenate the first array onto that, and then you concatenate the second array onto that. Well, you can just use the spread operator too if you want, and it's this kind of thing. So the combined array will be like unpack array 1 right here, and then unpack array 2 right here. So spreading, that's the official word. So that's the spread operator. Cool thing. Because you can use it to call functions that have an arbitrary number of arguments, like mat.max. You can inject 1 argument into that, 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever. So in the old way, you had to do this kind of thing, mat.max.apply, and then null, because there's no real dis in that kind of thing, and then the numbers onto that. Or you could just, in the new syntax, with the new syntax, just spread them. Awesome, that also works. And another use case, if you want to just clone an array, well, you pick a new array, so this is right here and right there, and then spread an existing array into the new array. And now you have a copy. Easy. No, not easy? Yeah. All right, so this is ES 2015 features that get me really excited, and that some of you might use. I just asked you a few minutes ago. Some of you might be using already. ES 2016. Who ever heard of ES 2016? Oh, okay. That's quite a lot of people, because like some people know like the ES6 thing, but then the rest, they don't know about that. Well, ES 2016, that was like a really minor release. There are only 2 things in that. Array includes, so that's array.prototype.includes. And the exponentiation operator, I will tackle both of them because there are only 2 of them. Why not? Array includes, the thing does what it says that it does. Like, does an array include this element? The only use case that there is for that is if you have an array that contains not a number. Because if you check it with index of, array with not a number inside it, index of, not a number, it says, well, it's not there. If you use includes, then it says, it's in there, right there. So this is the only use case. Always use includes from now on. Just a small side rant with that. Right here, I'm going to take a peek. So it says array includes, but then we have element.classlist.contains. Includes, contains. Then we have string.includes, map.has, and set.has. So we have like has, includes, and contains. It's a lot to remember, no? Thankfully, our IDE can autocomplete that for us. And then the exponentiation operator, a feature that I use on a daily basis. If you want to do something with powers, the double asterisk, and then we have the same thing. Woohoo! ES 2016. That was that. And then ES 2017. Yeah, I know I'm just talking about a lot of stuff, but there's a lot of stuff to talk about. ES 2017, also some stuff in there. We'll only talk about these kind of things. The async functions, you remember this one? That's the example with the promises. So we went from the callback hell towards the promises. Well, you can also use re-implement that using async functions, and I really like the async functions. So if you take this example, and we just wrap it inside a function. So const fetch all data. So now it's inside a function, and the body is the same, except that we just return the promise thing. How do we make this function asynchronously? It's really simple. You just put the async keyword in there, and then you say, hey, JavaScript, this function is asynchronically. It might pause at some certain point in time. But of course, we have to adjust the body. Like what we really want to say here is just call the first endpoint, wait for the response to come in, and when that's ready, call the second endpoint, wait for its response, and then call the third endpoint, and so forth. Well, using the async function, you combine that with the await keyword, and then our code example from here becomes this short kind of thingy, which is great. This reads, you can read it, the child can read it. Async function, oh, wait right here, don't continue. Whenever it's resolved, okay, store the result inside result1, continue to the next line, oh, wait right here, and so forth. And so that's really awesome stuff. It really compacts your code, and it's really nice, I think. A question that I sometimes got like, hey, but okay, now you have to just execute one, then wait, execute the other, wait again, and then the third, so that's not parallel. How can you do that? Well, you can just inject an array of promises into promise.all, await that one right here, and immediately like destructure it. So this is like a combination of an ES 2015 feature with an ES 2018 feature. Cool stuff. And then object.entries, that's also a nice one. Like we have object.keys. From a certain object, get me all the keys. Well, now you can ask, what are the values? So you get an array with these values right there. Or you can ask for the entries. And then the entries return you an array. And then each element on that array is again an array with the key that was there, and then the value. Key, value, and so forth. I use this one a lot because I want to loop over an object from time to time and like get the keys and the values. Like I come from a PHP background where I used to do that a lot, and then in JavaScript that wasn't really possible. So now you can just like, okay, you get the entry from object.entries of the user, key, and the value. But now if you combine it with destructuring, you can go really far. Like I don't want to know user index 0, user index 1. That's I want to know that it's a key and it's a value. So you can do this kind of stuff. Here you destructure the entry. The entry is an array with 2 items onto it. The first one is the key, the second one is the value. And if you want to compact your code even more, then you can destructure immediately into your for loop. Like this, for const key value of object.entries, so you do the destructuring directly in the for of loop. It's also amazeballs, really compresses your code. I like this. So these are the ES 2017 features that I like and use quite regularly. On to the next one, right? ES 2018? ES 2018. Yeah, I know. I can go on and on and on about it. ES 2018 was a not huge, not small release. There were some things in there, mainly about regular expressions, everybody's favorite, right? Yeah, oh, the front row is getting very excited about it. I'm not that huge a fan of regular expressions, although they are powerful, but it's always a mess to write them, you know. I will talk about these features that are in there, because these, like the top 3 I do use, and this one I just mentioned right here because it really helps. So object rest and spread. We had array rest and spread, so you remember that we collected the rest of the elements when we destructured. Well, you can do the same thing with an object right here. So we collect x and y from it, but what about a and b? Well, you use the same kind of syntax. This is the magic magnet. You use the 3 dots and then the name of the variable. So in the destructuring, all the rest get collected onto the rest variable. Then spreading, well, the same kind of thing. Like say we start with this, a user with a first name and a last name, and you want to add like extra properties onto that. How would we do that? Well, the first method of doing that, that's like the old way. You take the user, then you assign it into another variable, and then you add some extra things. But beware with this, because yeah, you also manipulate the user here, because it's the same reference to the same memory location and stuff like that. So here you mutate the original object too, so beware with that. You can use object.assign. That's also something new from ES 2015. So you start with an empty object, you create a new object, and then you assign the user object onto that, and then add Twitter and city also onto that. So now you have an object, a new object with 4 keys. A question I got last week from somebody who said, like, but what if I also add first name here? Will that override the first name from the user thing? Yes, so it will take the last one. If I now add another object onto this object assign method, again an object with Twitter, it will be overwritten, and it will have the last value that you inject into that. But I was talking about object rest and spread, right? How do we do that? Well, we do it the very same way as we did with the arrays. We unpack, we spread the user into a new context. So this is the new object. We spread the user into that. And hey, by the way, we add Twitter and we add city onto that. And again, trailing comma, team trailing commas. Yeah. Am I the only one who likes trailing commas? The guys in the back. And girls in the back, perhaps. I don't know. I can't see from here. One big warning with this. You have shallow copies when you do this kind of stuff. So if you use object assign or we spread it, so we have 2 clones. Well, if we manipulate the original zip in the original address object, then it also gets manipulated into our cloned things. If you do want to have a deep copy in JavaScript, that's possible. You just do json.stringify of your object, and then you JSON parse it again. That's one option. It doesn't handle everything correctly, but you can get most deep clones with that. You could also do something like window.postMessage, post your object to another window, and then from that window, post it again to the original window. Then you also have a deep copy. I think Surma wrote a nice article on that, like 5 ways how to do deep copies in JavaScript. Really crazy stuff, like put it in local storage and get it again from there. That also creates a deep copy. Then object rest and spread. That's really, really powerful, because this is React. This is a React example. Say I have a transaction detail component. I want to use it like this. So I pass in a transaction onto that with some extra props, some extra attributes. And I want the output to be this, like, okay, we need a transaction to render this kind of thing right here, but then all the other props, I want them to be right there onto the view. This is React Native, by the way, because we have the accessibility label thing. So how would we do that? Well, we can use object rest and spread for this. This is the implementation. Inside our render function, we destructure the transaction from the props, from the this.props, from the properties of our component. So the properties are takes, accessibility label, and style. We destructure the transaction from that, and we collect all the leftover props using rest, object rest, into the props variable. So props and this.props are not the same right here. And then when we return it, we destructure it again. No, we spread it again. So first we collect it, and then on the rendering part, we just explode it again right there. This is awesome stuff, because sometimes you do want to have extra attributes onto there that are not relevant for the contents of your component, but are relevant for the wrapper around your component. A neat trick you can do with this, it took me a while to find it out, but you can actually delete a property from an object by destructuring it from the original object and then collecting all what's left over onto a new object. So if you want to delete email from that object, you destructure it from it, and then user without email will contain first name, last name, Twitter, and city, but no email. This is like pure genius. But the first time you see it, you're like, what? So I like this one. Promise.prototype, but finally, if you come from another programming language or another scripting language, you might notice, like here we have some duplicate code, right? We hide the spinner if it resolves or when it fails. Well, we always want to hide the spinner because we always started before fetching stuff. So we can do this at the very end with finally. Yeah, makes sense, right? It's in other languages. An async iteration, that's also worth to mention. Not because that I use it daily, because we might be using it in the near future. If you're working with async code, like here we have some promises right here, 2 promises onto an array. If we just loop over them using for off, we get the promises back. But if we await them, we say like, hey, okay, that one promise, the very first one, await its result, store it into result, and then log it, and then continue with the for loop. So for await off, that's also possible thanks to this new addition in ES 2018. And then one thing about regular expressions that I want to mention, like this is really confusing sometimes, like what is the year, what is the month, what is the day, and then it depends on the format that you're using or the country kind of stuff. What if we could just name it? Like the first thing here is the year, and the second thing is the month, and then this is the day. Well, you can do that using named capture groups. Like here you say, okay, this first part, store it in a variable, store it in year, and then the second one in month and day. Then you can ask the groups of your result, and then .year, .month, .day. This is handy, makes your code more readable, right? Who wants to work with all these indices? Confusing sometimes. So these are ES 2018 features. Now I might hear you thinking like, hey guy, or great and stuff like that, but didn't you say this talk was what's next for JavaScript? This is like what's now for JavaScript? Yes, so I'm going to talk about that right now, but first a small intermezzo, TC39. Who here has heard of TC39? Quite a few of you, but a lot of people haven't heard of TC39. Because you might be wondering, like, okay, we have the ECMAScript standard, like ES 2019, that will be there in next January, but who gets to decide what goes into the standard and what doesn't get into the standard? Well, it's TC39, Technical Committee 39 from ECMA International. They are burdened with the task, like to define the ECMAScript standard, so the the ECMA 262 standard. That's their task. Like, hey guys, you there, you do that. But who are TC39? Well, its members are companies, mainly browser vendors, but also other people that are in there. Like you can be part of it, even though you're not working for Mozilla or Google or Microsoft or whatever. No, the people in there are from all kinds of companies. Like I think Motorola is also part of TC39. They also have a person that represents them right into there. They meet regularly. They meet every 3 months. So the cool part is, like, they had a meeting exactly 1 week ago. And then on that meeting, a lot of stuff changed, which makes it really exciting to have my presentation up to date, because the meeting notes aren't available yet. So it's like half a bit of guesswork, what changed and what not. But so the TC39, they decide what gets into the ECMAScript standard, but they don't write all the proposals themselves. If you have an idea about JavaScript, like you have a Java background or a C# background or whatever, and you think like, well, this kind of thing is possible in C#, but it's not possible in JavaScript, go ahead and just write a proposal and say like, hey guys, I want to have this kind of stuff into JavaScript, and they will consider it. And they will consider it using this process. It's a 5-stage process, and your proposal has to propagate through it, and then stage 4 is the final stage, and then it's really part of the standard. But they only do that at the end of the year. So like right now, a few proposals already have reached stage 4. They are stage 4, they are final, but they won't be part of ES 2018 because that's already defined. So in January, they will say, okay, ES 2019, what are all the proposals that reached stage 4 the past year? Those will now be part of ES 2019. So Strawman, that's like just a napkin. If you have a napkin and you have an idea and you write it onto that and you submit a photo of your napkin, that's fine. That's stage 0, like just one big bucket filled with proposals. But then, yeah, you have to be a bit more formal about it, like just not on a napkin, perhaps on a nice markdown file or something like that, with a small prose outlining the problem and like a small suggestion for an API, like, okay, this is the problem, that should be how we can fix it, let's discuss about it. And then, of course, an identified TC39 champion must be part of it. So you can propose the proposal at stage 0, they will talk about it, and then somebody from TC39 will say, okay, I'm also going to work on that proposal, and hopefully it will make stage 4 at the end. Then stage 2 is a draft. This is really nice. Transpiler support for syntax or a polyfill. So a proposal can be in stage 2, not part of a browser or not part of the official language, but a transpiler, like a module for Babel, can already be available, or a polyfill for the browser can also be available. So you can already use it at that moment. But do know that it might still change. So it's a bit tricky. Then stage 3 is the candidate. That's like, okay, it's mostly finished, the syntax is defined, we just need some other formal kind of stuff. And then eventually we go over to stage 4, and that's like, oh, yeah, stage 3. This is really important, including browsers. Like browsers can include implementations of stage 3 proposals. Like a few of the things I will show you now, you're going to say like, hey, but that's in Chrome, and that's in Firefox. Correct, but it's still not official. And then stage 4, that's like the final phase, some check marks like an official editor, checked all the spelling errors and stuff like that. It's part of the entire document, so this is stage 4. But do know, proposals can be withdrawn at any time. Like a proposal can be at stage 3, but then another proposal, perhaps like a better implementation or an alternative implementation, or one big proposal that combines 2 other proposals, might be proposed. And then a proposal from here can be withdrawn. An example is object.observe. That was a proposal submitted by Adi Osmani. It reached stage 2, and then it got dropped all of a sudden because there were other solutions to the problem it was trying to solve. And you can find all these proposals online. So this is like the main source for what I'm about to tell you now. So what time do I have? Still 5 minutes. Yeah. Okay, I will talk really fast. So ES Next, what's like next for JavaScript? So these are a few of the proposals, and you can see the stage being mentioned right there. So dynamic imports, this is great. You don't ship your entire truckload of JavaScript to the browser. You say, hey client, the moment you need this functionality, import the module from online, parse it, and then use it. For example, a lightbox. Classic example. Class fields. If you want to have a class field back in the day, like you had to do the constructor and this.clickCount equals a value, we no longer need that. You can define it straight into your class. If you're using React, you're already using this state equals and so forth. Same goes with statics. It's also another proposal. You can also do that. Static prop types equals from React. That's this. Private methods. This is public. You can access it from anywhere. This is also public, by the way, because the language is not preventing you from using it as public. So we need like an identifier or something, or something else to indicate this is private. Well, they came up with this solution. I find it really confusing because I always think it's a comment. It's not a comment, it's an indication that it's private. Numeric separators. Is this a million, 10 million, a billion, 10 gazillion-ish, whatever? If you add these fellas in between, you know that. Oh, it's a billion. By the way, it changed. On the last TC39 meeting, they changed the underscore to a single quote due to some conflicts with other things. All right. You can also use it on hex values. You can also use it on octals. Is it? Oh, binaries. That's also possible. Decorators. The Angular folks will go crazy about this. The Java folks will go crazy about this. You can do this kind of stuff in the near future. There are more decorators. For example, I like these two, debounce and throttle. Just add it as like a sort of comment on top of your function, as a decorator on top of your function, and it will be debounced or throttled. And two things that I really want to talk about. Like here we have a problem. Cannot get title of undefined because non-existent is non-existent. So we get the JavaScript error on screen. How do we fix that? Well, if you know CoffeeScript, this kind of thing might be familiar to you. Or if you use Elixir, that's also something that supports it. You can use the question mark and the dot. So it will like evaluate, is the left-hand side, is it not falsy, then continue on and else stop. A note about this though, it's question mark dot. So if you have like an optional function or for an array, you have to use this kind of stuff. It's not just a single question mark. Kind of confusing. But then we have another problem with this. Like show splash screen, it's difficult to pronounce, right? That's false. So the left-hand side of this thing results in false, false or true equals true. What about it? Well, we can use this fellow right here. That like checks, is the left-hand side, is it not undefined or not nil? Then take the right-hand side of our expression, else, yeah, like that. Pipeline operators, if you're doing shell kind of stuff, you can pipe it onto each other, might be in there. Math extension, I'm skipping over these. This is also an interesting one. Like check what is the type of my variable at a given moment. Like to calculate distances for vectors, you have to use different formulas. This is like switch case, but for the type of your variable. A use case is this. Like if you do a fetch, and if it's an HTTP 200 or an HTTP 404 or status, whatever, you can do this kind of stuff. Stage 1, so it's not in Babel yet or something like that. You can't use it today, but perhaps in the near future. Function binding, skipping over this. Canceling promises, that will also be available, but I'm also going to skip that one because we're running out of time. A string addition, trim start, trim end. The crowd goes wild. It's not official yet, but it's going to be in there. And then mix-ins. If you know PHP mix-ins or stuff like that, this is like a solution for partial classes. You define them there, and then you can use, in class C, you can use the baz, the foo, and the bar function right there. Object.entries, I mentioned that one. We will be able to do the opposite, object.entries, getting there. Skipping this one. And then this is the last example, I guess. I know. It's slicing. If you want to slice an array, this is the long format. Sprinkle on some syntactic sugar onto that, and you get this. Wow. Makes sense. Oh, array flat and schmoozegate, worth to mention. It's been renamed to flat. Array.flat. That's been changed last week. So yeah, top of the list, some more stuff, not talking about that one. Just one note, you might be thinking like, hey, okay, you're talking about stuff that we will be using like within 5 years from now. Well, that's not entirely true because there are stuff like Babel. They have things for that that you can use in your code and it gets transpiled to ES 2015 compatible code, for example. And also browsers already ship some stuff, like stage 3 proposals, dynamic import, it's already part of Chrome. That was it for me. Thank you very much. My name is Bram. I have a blog. Yeah, people still do that. Any questions?
All right, thanks. So we have questions because we're using Slido.
Yeah, right.
The top question, I'm going to come to at the end because it's an important one. So Fabian is asking, how do you handle errors with async wait functions as there's no catch anymore, obviously?
You just wrap it in a try catch.
There you go. Okay, when are the browsers going to support these features natively? Or will we always need Babel.js?
It depends, depending on the browser. So for example, like Chrome is ahead of a few things with that. Sometimes it's behind a flag, sometimes it's not behind a flag. Dynamic imports, for example, are there. I think the array.flat will also make it into a future version of Chrome, like within 2 versions from now, Canary thing, kind of stuff. There's always something available like Babel polyfill that you can import into your code, but please do that with caution and selectively. So that's for like browser features, and you can also use the extra Babel plugins to translate it. What you can also do next to that is add some feature detection. Like it's perfectly possible right now to transpile your whole code to ES5, load that into a browser, but then like do a small check, like if the client understands ES 2015, load in a different piece of JavaScript, and then you differentiate at the moment you are loading it.
All right, I've got another one here. Now, forgive me, this is a little bit over my head. Oh, yes. As we progress in the future, there are more simplifying languages created as Golang. Will it take over? What is your opinion about these two non-GUI targeted?
Yeah, it makes kind of sense. I haven't touched these personally because there's a trend that everything is compiling down to JavaScript. So I like that. I did have a look at a few other things in the past, like for example CoffeeScript. I also used to do that. What I see right now is a trend like a lot of languages exist and they're all borrowing stuff from each other. Like the arrow functions, that's quite new for JavaScript. It's been in other languages for ages. So we are like borrowing stuff, and eventually you have all the features kind of available, like kind of all the features available in most languages. Back, a small addition onto that, back when I was like in education, I used to be a teacher for quite a while. Students mostly ask me like, hey, but which is the best programming language? And my answer is, well, the one you can program it fastest in. So it really depends on your personal choice. If you want to write something in Golang, go ahead. If you like JavaScript, go ahead. It should please you. Programming should be fun.
Okay, so we've got 1 minute left, so I'm going to ask the all-important question, and maybe we can do a bit of a show of hands. Tabs or spaces? Hands up for tabs.
2 hands.
All right, who's spaces then? Who are you? God.
There's gonna be some interesting talks. Yeah, if somebody from the crowd here has a question for me, please ask it today, because tomorrow morning I have to leave. Like at 6 o'clock I have to get up tomorrow morning. So if you have a question, ask me today in the lobby, whatever. Ask me today.
Great. Okay, everyone give it up for Bram.
Thank you.